Hello, and welcome to this HCAM News special regarding Hopkinton's Downtown Corridor Project. I am your host, Tom Nappy, and today I have representatives from the town who will be addressing various questions and concerns about the Downtown Corridor Project. As many of you know, there is a special town meeting on Monday, December 9th, beginning at 7 p.m. at Hopkinton Middle School, and it was a group of residents who formed the Main Street Alliance against the Downtown Corridor Project who received the 200 required signatures on a citizen's petition to call for that special town meeting. We had originally scheduled this program for Monday with both representatives of the town and the Main Street Alliance scheduled to appear. Due to the weather this week, we had to reschedule for this evening, and we invited all participants back. The town representatives are joining me in the studio. Members of the Main Street Alliance are not. The purpose of our program is to provide an opportunity for the town to engage in a conversation about this project. I will be bringing forward questions and concerns about the project that we have collected from our community through various media channels. We have tried to be comprehensive and concise, as it is our hope that tonight's discussion will help you consider all aspects of this significant project. Before we get started, I will be giving each of you an opportunity to introduce yourselves and to briefly talk about your role with the project. We'll start off with Mr. Herr.
Hi, I'm Brian Herr. I'm a member of the Select Board here in Hopkinton. I still haven't got over that yet. I'm in my fourth term and been working on this project now between my time at the Select Board as well as on the Planning Board, probably about 15 years, and looking forward to the conversation tonight.
All right.
I'm Uriel Kramer, and I am the chairman of the Planning Board, and I am also here to participate and support the project and also answer questions for people if I can.
Hi, Tom. I'm Joe Markey. I'm a resident of Ash Street, about a third of a mile up from the Common. I have served as a volunteer on boards in town, but I'm involved in this project strictly as a resident and a citizen who has followed it closely since we moved here in 2003 and attended all the town meetings, and I'm advocating for this project as a citizen.
Okay. Scott?
Hi, Scott Richardson, immediate past president of the Hopkinton Chamber of Commerce. Been very involved in the review and support of this project for many years, and we bring the Chamber's perspective on what an enhancement this would be for the town.
Okay.
And I'm Matt Chase with VHB, Senior Project Manager. I manage a team of about 15, and we do different design work of corridors of this nature throughout Central and Western Mass.
My name is Amanda Bazinet. I'm also project manager of VHB. I've been working on this project as a senior project engineer, advancing the design of that.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you all for coming today. We'll start off with having someone give a brief overview of how this project will change downtown Hopkinton.
Yeah, I'll kick it off if that works. As a resident, I'm a big fan of this project. I think the realignment of the intersection downtown is one of the main features that will improve traffic flow there and safety. I see safety as a theme throughout this project. The Marathon Way will become much more safe as a frequent user of the Common. I've always been nervous about that north side of the Common where Marathon Way shares road space with Main Street. It's kind of a big parking lot, really. It's more than a way. And this will add some green space between Marathon Way and Main Street, creating a buffer for users and park on the north side. There's drainage issues downtown. As you drive through over the past many years, you'll see it floods when there's flash floods. It just puddles up there. We're going to be fixing the drainage there, upgrading drainage throughout the project. Today, it would be very treacherous to ride your bike. I actually used to try riding my bike to South Street. I was hit one day in front of Town Hall, and I haven't ridden the bike since then. Right now, there is limited shoulder and definitely not a full bike lane width in the road. Very dangerous to ride your bike through the downtown, sharing space with cars that are moving and parked. This project will deliver a separated bike lane, my new favorite kind of bike lane since I was hit. and separating the bike lane from the traffic and the parking spaces. So that's another benefit. The way I see it, if you think back at all the private properties along Main Street, going back 15 years, every single one of the major properties has invested in itself, whether it's Bill's Pizza, Middlesex Savings Bank, Hopkins Drug, Santander Bank, all have gone through major renovations to their exterior and interior. The Central Tavern. The one entity in the downtown that has not put its money down is us, the community. And this project shows forward investment by our community in our downtown that signals to the business community that we're with you. As you invest in the downtown, we're investing in infrastructure as the community grows.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll get to some of the questions or concerns that were sent to us. How much will the project cost and who is paying for it? And is there a possibility that cost could go up? And anybody could just jump right in.
Do you want to take a stab at that, Joe? You want me to do that?
No, someone else, yeah.
So the project is approximately $15 million. Okay, so we can get into the exact dollar, but as a sales guy, I'd like to try and keep it somewhat simple. So $15 million. $8,300,000 of that $15 million is coming from the Massachusetts Department of Transportation through a TIP fund. Okay, so that's money that we applied for through our state representative and state senator years ago. Got that money assigned to this project through the process that we used to follow for the designs. And so $8.3 million is coming from the state. $500,000 is coming from the state through a MassWorks grant. So there's another $500,000 there. $3,250,000 is coming from host community agreements that are in place, coming from the Legacy Farms development, as well as what was the Muse development, which is the large apartment complex off of Lumber Street. So that's 2.2 from Legacy, 1 million from the Muse, making $3.25 million. And then $3,400,000 in town borrowings. The taxpayers, we are paying for $3.4 million of this $15 million. We appropriated $400,000 through a town meeting article in 2010, if I remember correctly. And then we appropriated an additional $3 million at 2018, Article 20 of the annual town meeting in 2018. And then the easements article was heard thereafter, right after that. That was Article 47. So the article right before the easements was the article for the $3 million. And that $3 million that the taxpayers are paying for is largely the work that the state can't fund for various reasons. If it's aesthetic stuff, if it's the undergrounding the wires, if it's trash cans along the way, if it's other things that the state can't fund through statewide taxes, the citizens have voted to do that. So that adds up to approximately $15,450,000, matching that $15 million cost for the project. Could the project cost go up? Sure. Any construction project can go up. Any construction project can go down. We had a budget for the Marathon School, that Joe was one of the chairs of that committee, new school that we recently built in Hopkinton. That budget came in, you guys came in under budget by how much?
$4 million under the amount appropriated.
So that budget we set for, let's say it was $25 million or $30 million, whatever the number was. They got it through the contractor and through the bid process and then managing the project to have it come in under budget. Could this project come in under budget? Yes. Could this project come in over budget? Yes. The state would likely be on the hook for those items that the state is reimbursing or paying for, not reimbursing, but paying for through that $8.3 million. If that $8.3 million segment goes up, I believe the state will pay for that. If we buy 28 trash cans instead of 22 trash cans and the aesthetics budget goes up, we would pay for that. But we would not pay for that without going back to town meeting and seeking additional funds through a future article if we have to increase the amount above the 3.4 that we've already appropriated.
So essentially, it can't go up unless you go back to town meeting and ask for more.
For our $3.4 million, we are capped at $3.4 million. We cannot spend another dollar above what town meeting has said we can spend, correct?
Okay, and that leads us to our next question. Residents already voted to approve $3.4 million for the project. It was $400,000 in 2010 Article 18 and $3 million in 2018 Article 20. How much, if any, of that has already been spent?
So I can handle that too, being the fiscal board in town. To date, what we have expended is the $500,000 in MassWorks grant and $400,000 in town borrowing. Out of that $3.4 million, what we've gone out and spent, though, is $900,000. So the town has spent approximately $900,000 on engineering design and things of that nature. We've not put a shovel in the ground yet, obviously, for the project, but we have spent a significant chunk of the 3.4 to date.
Okay, and was that expected, the 900,000 up to this point?
I would defer to our engineering friends on that. I mean, we are on budget for our engineering process and expenses.
Yeah, I think it's, everything is pretty traditional in this respect from a design standpoint for this level of project.
And where we are in the project and so forth.
Yep.
All right. The proposed plan of the project will require property easements. Can you briefly describe what a property easement is and the types of easements this project will require?
Well, we don't have an attorney here.
I'm
I'm not
an
going to
engineer.
pretend I'm one, but I have looked into it, and of course, I've got utility wires across my front yard, and I guess that means there's an easement under those wires. And what I learned in the research over the past few weeks is that not only the pole that might be in your front yard, but if there's a pole on your neighbor's front yard and a pole on your other neighbor's front yard, and there's wires connecting, and those wires are over your grass, there's an easement on your yard, on my yard, for those overhead wires. So in fact, in this project, 60% of the easements, which an easement is simply a right for someone else to access someone else's property. It protects both parties. So in this project, 60% of the, first I should say, the vast bulk of all the work in this project is on town-owned land. The town-owned roadway and what's called the town-owned right-of-way, which in some cases would surprise people. The right-of-way that's town-owned sometimes is 6 feet into individuals' properties. And that provides the flexibility, as you've seen in other parts of town, for the town to put in a sidewalk, for example, which they've done on Ash Street and parts of Hayden Row and other places, and on West Main Street, too. Those sidewalks were on town road right-of-way. In the same way, this project, the bulk of it is in town road right-of-way. However, some easements are required. 60% of the easements in this project are temporary. They're construction easements, so that the construction worker has a way to step on property as he's doing work on the sidewalk or the road during the course of the project. Once the project's over and closed, those easements go away. The rest, the 40%, are permanent easements. Half of the permanent easements are the type of utility easements I was talking about, for the telephone pole, the guy wire that holds up the poles, the wires that are strung across the poles, the wires that go from the pole in the street to the corner of your house to deliver electricity to your house. It provides the utility company a way to service your home for your benefit. And in the case of the project, some of those wires that go from the pole to the corner of the house will be buried, so there will be a permanent easement where that wire is buried. But in the case where the wires are still overhead, there will be an easement in the shadow below the wire on your ground, so that in case anyone needs to climb a ladder, they'll...
Point of clarification on that. The underground connection that goes to the houses will be a temporary easement.
Temporary.
Correct.
Correct.
Yep, not a
Thank you.
permanent easement.
Okay, so that's also temporary.
So there's, and just I guess a clarification on that, there's, the permanent easements for utilities are for the pole, the wires that you see on the poles today. When that goes overhead or trespasses over someone's property, that's a permanent utility easement. But the utility easements for the undergrounding, once it's connected to the house, the owner remains the property owner. It's just a temporary easement to make the connection that is now overhead to the house. It will be underground, so it's not a permanent being taken to the house.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Thank
Is there a cost associated with that undergrounding connection, and how is that getting paid for? Is that part of the overall $15 million?
So that is included in the cost, and that is a cost that is a non-participating cost. That is a cost that the town has to pay for because the state won't pay for undergrounding of the utilities for a state, federal funded project.
Specifically, the connections to the individual houses and the businesses, that's part of it too?
Yes.
Okay.
All in that budget.
All in
And-
that 3.4?
And as part of that, when we make
Correct.
those underground connections to the houses, we must make sure that the panels that are in the house can handle the new underground connection. So there could be some upgrades to people's services in order to accommodate that. And we did, are accounting for that as part of this process when we go through it. So.
So let's just explore that for 1 second. Tom, are you okay if we
Oh,
dialogue a
absolutely.
little bit here? So I just purchased a new house 3 blocks from the corridor project, just on Hayden Road, just up past the Common. And the electric service there, the panel, was in disrepair when I purchased the house. Had it inspected. He's like, that has to go. I said, okay. So I went out and got a new service, did a whole new electrical system inside the house with receptacles and everything else. The panel, the service from the pole into the house, all that, $4,000 that I had to pay. So if somebody has to get an upgrade to their panel because their panel may be aged out or is getting close to its end of life cycle, and the project can come and throw a new panel in there, that's a benefit to the homeowner, a significant benefit if they've got a 100 or 200 amp service. It could be $4,000 or $5,000 easily. So something people should consider as they think about whether power coming underground is going to be a problem for them. It could be a nice benefit for them. Amanda, while we're talking about easements, if you wouldn't mind just kind of scrolling the color plan from west to east as we continue this discussion. I think Joe might have a couple more points.
I just want to clarify, do you want the color rendering plan or do you want the colored up easement plan where we designated each
Easement
of
plan,
them?
yeah. And what Amanda's going to pull up here, and then Joe, you can kind of jump back in, is going to be the easement plan from the far west of the project to the far east of the project over by the Common. There's 3 colors on here. There's light blue, which is temporary easements. And as she scrolls, and maybe she'll scroll a couple of times, you'll see most of this is light blue. Light blue means it's a temporary easement, and when the construction is done, the easement goes away. And then there's orange, which is a permanent easement. Most of that's around the intersection straightening area with a couple of other spots along the corridor. And then there's the dark blue. The dark blue are the utility easements that Joe has described, we were talking about a couple of minutes ago. So maybe if you kind of scroll that a couple of times as Joe sort of finishes up his thoughts.
Yeah, I guess I'll finish with questions because I don't claim to be an expert on this stuff. But again, half of the count is that half of the permanent easements are related to utility easements. And then the other half of the permanent easements are non-utility. And then as we look at the permanent easements that are not utility, by my count, 2/3 relate to 5 properties. And I think those are the properties around the main intersection, the Sunoco and the Cross Point, and a couple others. So maybe you can identify which those are. And then other than that, the other permanent non-utility easements, I believe 11 are related to 11 individual properties, 1 each. And they're mainly pertaining to sidewalk easement. Is that right? Or do you want to walk us through?
So I can certainly go through the project from beginning to end. At the very beginning limits, we aren't taking temporary easements for the first couple of properties that are within the limits of work. However, as we go along, as Brian mentioned, the light blue is temporary, the orange are permanent, and then the dark blue are permanent utility easements. So the orange are taken for a variety of reasons. You've mentioned 2 of them for sidewalk purposes or for the realignment of the roadway at the major intersection. At this location, there are a couple of smaller ones for signs or for mast arms for the signal at this intersection, or for, at this particular case, this driveway is being included as part of the signal timing. And so they have a loop being placed in their driveway, so it will also call the signal. So there's a permanent easement there, so that can be maintained.
So if I could interrupt for 1 sec. So their driveway is going to call the signal, meaning they'll be able to get out of their driveway, so they get to stop in other directions so they can get out.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So that one's kind of an individual case. There are also permanent easements. These orange ones here are for sidewalk or for the roadway. And then, as you mentioned, the overhead wires are also something that we take permanent utility easements for. At this location here, this one is for a guy wire and pole. In many cases, these are already existing, but because either it's an undocumented easement or we've shifted the location, we're taking a new permanent utility easement. So through here, the utilities are remaining above ground. So the majority of these easements on this side of the roadway that are the dark blue are for the aerial, because we're relocating the utility poles, which are currently right at the edge of the roadway, sometimes in the roadway, to the back of sidewalk. So there will be a greater separation between the utility pole and the vehicles. It's a safer place for the poles to be. But as a result, the overhead wires are now crossing people's properties. We're requesting easements for that. On this side of the road, it's majority just on the southerly side of the road, majority just temporary easements. Again, that's for grading purposes, to reconstruct the driveways if we must, and just for access for the construction workers to do the work that is proposed. Same situation through here. Again, there's a lot of dark blue along the back here. This is for aerial. There are a handful of locations that are for utility poles and for guy wires. This is for a wire that's crossing to go to Mayhew Street, one of the side streets. At this corner, we're placing in new accessible ramps. So we're taking small permanent easements at this location to make sure that the wheelchair ramps are within the public right-of-way. Again, mostly temporary easements in this area. There is a very small sliver of a permanent easement across here, just for minor widening of the sidewalk in order to maintain a minimum sidewalk width to meet Mass DOT standards.
When you say a minor width there for that sidewalk, how many inches is that, feet is that, roughly?
So it varies from basically an inch up to, at the widest point, about a foot.
About a foot?
Yeah. There's a little kink in the layout line right here, so we're smoothing that out.
Okay.
This is for the new, this permanent easement here is for the new signal post for the new hybrid signal that's going in at this location. It will act as a flashing beacon for pedestrians to cross, as well as provide the police department and the fire department access to get their vehicles out quickly. It will call a signal, they can press a button, and then they'll be able to access. It will stop the traffic on Main Street to allow them access out. So that's a major safety improvement.
Amanda, why is the temporary easement so wide on that lot or two right there?
This one here. So part of it is because we are putting in the Opticom system, which is what they'll use to trigger the signal. So we have to run conduit into their property. In addition, this is in the area where the undergrounding is beginning, and we have to run a new underground connection to these buildings. So we're taking temporary easements up to the building face at this case.
Which property, is that the
This
fire
is the
station?
fire station.
That's the fire station.
This is a town
Okay.
property.
Yep.
I would like to point out as Amanda goes through this, the light blue area, those are the temporary easements, and about 65% of that area is used for a convenience area for the contractor to actually do his work, perform his work. There's a good chance that he may not even access that full area of the easement, but it's provided just for the convenience of doing that, making that work. And the state makes us provide that extra buffer for that convenience, so they're not working from one side all the time.
Matt, we've all driven around Massachusetts and seen these projects elsewhere being done, and one thing that I see that I'm a little bit worried about is the staging of piping, the staging of construction vehicles in the evening, things like that. How are we going to manage that in our downtown area? Are we going, does that easement allow for piping to be staged overnight and things, you know, for drainage and so on?
So, so we don't really have much of a say in terms of how the contractor does things. We give him information. There's going to be a Mass DOT resident on site that will be observing the work and giving direction to the contractor. The purpose of these easements is for access. It is not set out as a staging area. Typically what the contractor will do is they will find land nearby that they will then work out a lease with the property owner in order to utilize it during construction. So they'll use that for their equipment and their yard. They would work that out individually with wherever they identify as a location they'd like to have their field office located.
So we're not going to have stacks of pipe along in front of the fire station or in front of these folks' homes where it's a 10-foot easement?
They should not be doing that. I will note that they might, during the process of when they're actually physically out there working
Yeah.
on that, they'll probably have the materials there as they're working.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be long-term storage of materials. It's not meant to be them holding it as a holding area. It's meant for temporary access to actually construct the work.
As far as the construction on these easements, do you know if there's going to be construction at night that may interfere with people who have these easements going into their property?
So right now, the hours are set from 7 to 3 p.m., which is the standard hours. They are not supposed to do work that will interfere with travel during the peak hours, which have been defined as 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., and then again from, I believe, 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. However, there is language in the contract because it is imperative that we try and get this built as quickly as possible, and there are several utilities that are being placed underground. There's a lot of work to be done in a very small area. The contractor can request to do night work. However, they cannot do the night work without the prior approval of the town and the select board. So it would not be something that you would be caught unawares about. They would have to reach out to the town to get prior approval before they do any night work.
Okay. And this leads us to another question that we got sent in. One of the concerns about the easements was that in some cases, they will affect property value more than the compensation being offered for property owners. Can any of you address this concern?
I guess that must be referring to the permanent easements. because
Yes.
We just discussed that temporary easements are temporary, and that's 60% of them. And then of the ones that are permanent, half are utility easements. So those are the type that are already in place today on a lot of these properties, including mine. And most of us have utility lines overhead, so there's an easement there already. So they must be talking about the other permanent easements that are not utility easements, which again are affect a small number of properties. So maybe Brian or someone else can talk about the permanent non-utility easements.
You know, I'm not an appraiser. We are hiring professional appraisers and probably getting a couple different appraisers involved to make sure that we get fair market value figured out for everybody. But I can only speak from personal experience. I had a water easement in my property that I recently sold in town, and that water easement ran right across the back of the yard. And you know, we had a very extensive process to sell the house to the new owners, who are great neighbors and great people. But they were very thorough in their due diligence about the property. And the easement was about a 3-second conversation, and all the other questions were about 3 weeks, right? So they recognized there was an easement on the property, didn't change the price of the house that we were negotiating, didn't change how the price settled out, none of that. So from my personal experience, I didn't see that. It was you know, there was a lot of money involved. The house I recently bought in town has easements on it for utility, overhead wires. And it wasn't even discussed as part of the process. It wasn't discussed with the appraiser for the bank. It wasn't discussed at any time during the dialogue or the process I just went through buying and selling a house in town. There's easements all over Hopkinton. There's easements all over Massachusetts. Do they affect the property values? I don't know. There's so many of them. I personally have not seen that. Maybe a professional appraiser would have a different opinion, but if he does or she does, they're going to let those homeowners know, and they're going to get the fair market value for that easement that's granted.
And I do want to know, as part of this whole process, there are federal guidelines laid out. The town is following them. They've hired an appraiser and a review appraisal, which is required. And the appraisers will be the ones that are determining how to compensate people. And we as designers in the town, they are not making those decisions. It is being handled by a separate party, and when they are prepared to share that information, it will go out to the owners. There is also a process in place. If the property owner doesn't agree with the assessed value, there is a process in place for them to contest it, and then it will go through the legal system until a compromise is made. It will not stop the project from happening.
Right.
But it is something that there are contingencies and plans in place. Mass DOT has a process for the right-of-way, and the town is complying with that process.
So there's protections for the citizens that are getting these easements.
Yes, and you know, like I said, we're separate from that process, but the town is following Mass DOT's guidelines for that.
I just want to follow up with a question on that. I feel like I'm asking all the money questions. That money that may be determined that is owed to property owners, is that part of the overall cost? I just want to make sure.
I think that there's an allowance of sort in that number that's in there as of the numbers today. Until the appraiser values come out, we don't have the exact number.
Do you know what the allowance is?
I don't off the
Out of the
top
three,
of my head.
that would be out of the 3.4 million?
Yes, that is.
If I remember correctly, and I'm kind of looking out to one of my friends in the audience that might know this off the top of his head. If I remember correctly, I thought the number was originally budgeted at $350,000, somewhere in that range. And if it's more than that, it'll be more than that. We'll have to adjust some other things. If it's less than that, it'll be less than that, and we'll adjust otherwise. So, you know, again, we could always come in $4 million under budget, like the schools, or not 4 million, obviously, but because it's not that big a job. Or we could have higher appraisal amounts, and that would shift monies from other things to that. So we'll figure that out, but we don't have all those answers just yet.
But either way, it's based on formal appraisal process,
Yes.
governed by law.
Yes.
And this happened to us on another project, but if there is, an agreement cannot be made between the property owner and the town to acquire the property, the town has the right to take the property by eminent domain while it goes through a court process to figure out the legal ramifications of cost or negotiating costs, or even if they disagree with the market value, they have the right to you know, go through that process, but the town also has a right to take it to by eminent domain until that's figured out. And we had this happen on another project where the town ended up doing it for half the project and then negotiated with them as the project went through the bidding process before construction started.
Can I ask for clarification on that? Because when you use words like taking and eminent domain, that's what really gets people
It does,
into a scary spot. And can you clarify that in regards to temporary easements, utility easements, and, you know, the vast majority of what we have up here? Are you talking about, when you say taking, you're saying applying a temporary easement?
So in order to put the project out to bid, the town has to demonstrate to Mass DOT and to the state that all the easements, temporary, permanent utility easements, are all acquired, and that is a box that needs to be checked in order for the project to be bid.
Mhm.
If it's not checked, then the project can't go to bid, and then the money's compromised, you can't capitalize on the 8.3 that's available from the state. Then that is a process that is, that happens before the design process is complete. And then from there, if a negotiation cannot be completed, the town and the state, they give towns the right to pursue that option so that the project can stay on track, so the design can finish, so the project can go out to bid while that negotiation continues.
Yeah, I think it's important that we use specific words like applying an easement, because the easement is not ownership. The town isn't owning anything. The utility doesn't own your yard. You own your yard, but there's someone else, another entity that has a right to access it for a specific purpose. And whenever we can use that word instead of taking, I think it's more accurate and it provides a little more clarity. I understand it checks the box that all the easements are in place.
I think it's a legal term.
Yeah.
Whether
is
we
a
like it
legal
or not, it's
Yeah.
a legal term.
Yeah,
And I think that you have to use the appropriate terms and the legal terms and confront
It's fine
confront
to,
the
it's fine to
people's
use.
impressions on
Yeah,
it.
yeah, it's fine,
And
that's
and
right.
I don't throw
yeah.
that name out there to scare anybody, but
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
terminology that the state will
Right.
use.
Got
And
it.
it'll be brought to someone's attention at some point if someone does dispute or want to try to stall the project because they don't want to give they want to, you know, be
Right.
reimbursed for an easement.
Yeah, it's important. On the flip side, we have town-owned property that currently appears to be people's front yards, but it's actually town-owned property, right? Just like if you were to do an addition on your house and you find your neighbor's shed is actually on your side of the lot line. You talk to your neighbor and say, actually, that's my yard, and he has to move his shed, and then you build what you wanted to build there. We have situations like that today as a town where we own road right-of-way but haven't used it, so people's lawns have grown on top of it. These are a couple feet probably, but those are things that we're talking about as we're building in the right-of-way, but it may appear in some cases, correct me if I'm wrong, are there cases where somebody's front lawn is on town road right-of-way today and we're going to use that as road or
In-
sidewalk?
In several cases,
Yeah.
that is exactly what's happening. And in some cases, it is only 1 or 2 feet. In others, there's 5 or even 10 feet of space that people are currently utilizing as their front yard that is in actuality part of the public right-of-way. Now, because we are doing widening in some parts of the project and we are adding in bicycle accommodations, and in some areas there are no sidewalks at the current time, and we're including sidewalks, that means we do have to recover that right-of-way and use it for bicycle accommodations and sidewalk accommodations. So if the sidewalk, or in this case at the intersection where we're realigning the roadway itself is going beyond the public right-of-way, we are showing a permanent easement. if a permanent easement is not required on your property, it's because the sidewalk is actually within the public right of way. And it's scary. I know that a lot of people, they're maintaining it. They think it's theirs. But in actuality, legally, the public right of way is where the layout line has been designated, and we're doing our best to stay within the public right of way.
It's my understanding that the last time we did a public right-of-way layout, was that in 1950? Is that what I saw on the plan somewhere?
So some of these layouts, and I was just going to mention
they
this,
vary.
is some of them, the layouts are, a lot of these roads were set in the 1800s, 1900s.
Yeah, this is right here, like I just zoomed in on the right-of-way plan here. This current layout for Route 135 for Main Street, it was a county layout laid out in 1884. It varies in width. Some places it's 60 feet wide. So if the existing roadway is only 30 feet and 2 5-foot sidewalks, they have an extra 20 feet of right-of-way that they haven't utilized yet. So it does vary in width out here, but the layouts do vary from year. This one, Cedar Street, was laid out in 1851. So they are old in some cases, and they have been updated over the years in other areas, but these have been in place for years.
And it is, this is a common thing that we see in our projects, because when the layouts are established in 1800s and 1900s, whether it's a 60, 80-foot right-of-way, people are accustomed to seeing the edge of roadway as being, oh, that must be where the property line is. And when you think about how these roads were laid out for horse and buggy or whatever the accommodations were then, the cross-sections could be, tighter. So as traffic becomes more prominent and a variety of different users use the road, whether you're walking or biking, the cross-section creeps and starts to increase of the pavement or the usable area from the 1900s to what the current standards are. And that's where we see people seeing that, well, my curb's moving in, so you must be taking my property. When in fact, a lot of people don't realize that the first 5, 10, 15 feet or whatever it is to get to that 80 feet, 60 feet, or whatever the roadway cross-section is, it becomes a little surprising. So I
think it's important to recognize the technical aspects of what you're describing in terms of the right-of-way and these various widths and things like that. But I also think it's important to recognize that we've got folks that have lived along this corridor, some of them for 40, 50, 60 years, and they're used to seeing that grass. And I spoke with one of them. I've actually spoken with several of them recently. One of them, was at an address where there's that stone wall, and we've got to move it. We were going to move it 5 feet per Mass DOT plans recently, and we went back to Mass DOT with your help, and we're only moving it 2 feet now. So we're trying to be as accommodating as we can. There's certain places where we can accommodate a little bit. There's other places where we can't because of the design and sort of the technical parameters. But for all those technical reasons, we still can't forget that they've looked at this front lawn for a long time. And we have to be patient and try to get people to understand that. At the same time, we still have a job to do. So it's a difficult process, but I think if we explain it to people calmly with the facts, I think that helps the process.
And I would just like to add that the process that we're at now, where we're troubleshooting, I should say, or working out the kinks of the design with the property owners, where we're refining, this is the process. This is where this happens. It's not like we missed a step or that we forgot to do something. This is when this happens. And we're right at the point, right, where every project where we see it, where we start to enhance and change and tweak and do this. And so this is the norm. This is kind of where we should be on resolving this. And so I just wanted to point that out because
The other thing I just wanted to say is that this is the existing right-of-way, and it's not being expanded, even though it feels like there are changes that are coming for some people, and it feels perhaps like the right-of-way is being expanded, but this is the legal existing right-of-way, and it's not being expanded and won't be expanded. It just impacts people's perception of their property line.
Well, in the cases of, like we were stating, there are being permanent easements taken, which are changing where the road, the use in certain areas.
Yes.
But in the case of like what Brian mentioned, where there is a property owner that had, a lot of green space between the back of sidewalk and their home, and they didn't realize that some of it was actually public right of way. in that case, no, we're not changing the use. That is the legal definition of where their property began. We're not changing that, but we are doing our best to minimize the impacts if possible to these people and to stay within the legal boundaries of what is already defined as roadway layout wherever possible.
All right, thank you. Has there been any recent changes to the project heading into the special town meeting?
It's probably a good segue. I think we're just talking about some of the feedback that the project is getting from people who live along the project corridor, and based on their feedback, adjustments are being made.
Yes.
I know one, because I've been following the bike lane closely. In a very earlier draft of the design, there were 2 bike lanes. Now there's 1, and I recall why that is. It's because having one with a bidirectional on 1 lane takes up less width than if you had separate lanes, 1 on each side of the road. We got feedback back in the 25% stage. The town got feedback that we wanted to preserve parking and minimize encroachment into what people consider their front yard. So to do that, it takes up less width to have 1 bidirectional lane than 2, 1 on each side. But I think there's probably been a lot of talk with property owners that the project managers could outline.
Yeah, Matt, if you want to touch on some of the adjustments that we've made where we can to accommodate
Amanda
folks.
has a list that summarizes them. I mean, there's probably about 16 or 20 that we've really focused on when there's a request that the town receives. You know, we work very closely with town manager and town engineer to go through and do our very best to try to, you know, design to lessen the impact, or to see if we can come up with something more unique that, you know, we might have. Like you said, people live here for 40, 50 years, so they're seeing things that we might see for 3 or 4 years. So those are some of the things, but I know, you know, Amanda's got a list if you wanted to run through a couple.
Well, one of the challenges we have, before Amanda gets into some of the details, one of the challenges we have in general is there's been some talk about it. It hasn't been a transparent process, right? That's been some of the discussion in town, and that we've been keeping information from people. We have, and we can show it at town meetings as well, we have we've compiled a list of all the public hearings, public meetings, Board of Selectmen meetings, Select Board meetings now, Planning Board. I like how I transitioned that a little bit.
Nice job, nice job. I like it.
Planning Board meetings, Capital Improvements Committee meetings, because things had to go before them, before town meeting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's about 84 or 86 entries of processes and action items that the town took with a lot of input from the residents to make this happen to where we are today. But one of the perceptions is we're changing the plans. We keep changing the plans so that the residents can't keep up with the changes in the plans. But we're changing the plans based on the input we're getting from the same residents. So we're trying to be as accommodating as we can, but sometimes that's kind of coming back to bite us because we're changing the plan. We're not changing the plan to get somebody. We're changing the plan wherever we can to accommodate people. And I can tell you one story in particular. It's at the west side of town here where that stone wall is. The folks have been very concerned about this. We met with them the other day. Prior to that, the VHB folks worked very closely with MassDOT, and instead of moving that wall 5 feet in towards their house, we're only going to move it in 2 feet now. Whether we had moved it 5 feet or 2 feet, we're still in that right of way we've talked about extensively here this evening, but we're trying to accommodate them as best we can. We also talked about providing additional screening on the east side and west side of their property to help soften the view as they get the road comes 3 feet closer to their house. And finally, because we've had so many changes, and there's this trust thing, okay, there's a trust thing out there. There's a lack of trust thing with some folks in town about their elected officials and their professionals working this project. We said we would put it in writing to them now. We're ready to get to that point where we can say, this is what will happen. It will only move 2 feet. We will regrade to that new wall. We will put in plantings. And we put that in writing to them through the town manager's office. So it's a little hard when people don't trust their elected officials that we're trying to do the right thing on behalf of people. But when we can and we can put it in writing, we will do that as well to prove to people that we're trying everything we possibly can. So maybe if we show a rendering of that 5 West Main while Matt says something.
Before you can definitely bring that up, but I just want to speak a little bit on the process, and again, just kind of like the transition of the project and the process. It's a 5-step design process with Mass DOT. So there's a 25% design, a 75% design, 100% design, and then there's a plan, spec, and estimate, and that's usually a two-step process in its own. The project had a design public hearing in January of 18, and that was a 25% design. Following the review of the 25% design by Mass DOT, there were comments from Mass DOT to say, well, look at this, look at this, look at this. Okay, but you have enough. Go ahead to public hearing to get the public's, to present the project and show them that this is the concept we're moving forward, and get feedback and make any changes and whatnot. After we received the comments from all of that, and advanced to the 75% design, the 25% design is more of a two-dimensional. We check some three-dimensional grading and things to make sure that we don't have significant impacts adding walls or taking out, walls or whatever. But the 75% is where we do a lot of our grading, and we get into the real fine design. And when we transitioned from the public hearing to 75% design, we had to go back out in the field and collect survey. We had to get more survey on Wood Street and a bunch of other areas, the library. I mean, there are a lot of things that changed that we needed to collect data and basically do our three-dimensional design, figure out where our grading would end and would define our easements. And so we went through that process, and there were some people that were impacted, new people that were impacted that weren't impacted at the public hearing, some people that didn't get impacted as much, and that's part of the process. We wouldn't have known that information had we not received comments from the Mass DOT, heard from the public, or even gotten additional survey. So we received that additional survey earlier this year. The 75% submission went in March, and then at that point, more people were contacted because they were now affected because we had that data, and we finished in another advanced design phase for our project. And so the next phase for us is 100%, and this is where we work with the abutters to troubleshoot, fine-tune, enhance, tweak, and that's where we're at now. So that's just a little bit of the process to get to here. And again, not that we didn't miss anything, but I felt it was important to state that because I feel like some people feel like, we've identified impacts that they should have been identified before the public hearing at 25%, but honestly, we would not have known what those impacts are until we've gotten feedback, comments, or even that additional survey.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit about the process. Again, the Chamber's been very supportive and proactive on really kind of coordinating several meetings. Over the past 6 years, we've had 5 meetings that we've invited a lot of the businesses and residents along the corridor to attend. And right at the beginning, we got a lot of good input primarily on we're losing way too many parking spaces. And you remember some of the early additions, we were losing over, I think, close to 28 parking spaces. And that was a huge pushback from the businesses, obviously, and the people downtown. So we really kept pushing that and went back and forth a couple times with VHB on, say, hey, can we do something over here, and so on. So I think that they heard loud and clear from our members, and also just the accessibility and the some of the impacts around the common. But obviously at this point, again, they've taken that to heart, and we have basically almost a balance of parking between what's there now and what's proposed. Granted, a lot of them are in a different location, but at least we have about the same parity of parking, because that is a huge aspect of the success of any business in the downtown. Also, again, just the overall improvement of the sidewalks, curbs, street furniture, and so on. I don't know if anybody has been through Medway lately, 109. They went through this process over the past couple of years, and while it was underway, we all know there's going to be some pain. But right now, they're pretty much substantially done, and the overall improvement along 109 in Medway is phenomenal. I'm looking forward to seeing how Hopkinton, the corridor, can look as good as that. So, 2 cents.
So back to your original question about what things have changed. This is the prime example that Brian was talking about just a moment before at West Main Street. One of the things we did at this location, originally we were proposing a 5-foot shoulder for bicycle accommodations, and we were shifting the wall back 5 feet from its current location here. What we did instead was held the 3-foot existing shoulder for a longer distance and did our widening closer to the intersection for the bicycle accommodations. We looked at, placing the wall directly at the back of the sidewalk, and that between those two things, we were able to reduce the impacts in front of this property. Again, we did up this rendering to show, like the town had said, that they would provide some sort of screening for this property owner, whether it's arborvitae or a fence. They're working with the property owner to make sure that their concerns are met. In this area, I just want to go back to the board. So this is the same location in 2D plan view, like aerial. This is the area I was talking about. So we narrowed the shoulder slightly and then started to widen it after that property to minimize the impacts at 5 West Main. The project looked at several other alternatives. We considered as many things as possible to try and minimize and at the same time still provide the accommodations we need to maintain Mass DOT standards and still provide the rest of the town with the things that they need and things that came out of like the road safety audit, such as the left turning lane at this location. Another change that was made between 75% design and now is we took another look at this location to minimize the changes that were required to these parcel owners. We slightly narrowed the slidewalk, looked at placing curb at the back of walk so we could catch the grade more quickly. So now we no longer need temporary easements from these people. At this location, this was where we were originally proposing to start the separated bike lane, 2-directional separated bike lane, but this property owner here was experiencing very, very significant impacts. They came back to the town. We worked with Mass DOT to come up with a solution that would still provide bicycle accommodations, still provide a connection to the center trail, but minimize impacts to these property owners. So instead, we've created a transition from where we have on-road bicycle accommodations to an 8-foot shared use path, which then transitions at the center trail to being the 2-way bicycle lane. So we did a lot of things in this area to try and accommodate the abutters that were most impacted and that expressed their concerns. One of the other things I do want to note, this property owner, originally on the 75% design plans, we were requesting a small permanent easement from them for the installation of a proposed bicycle repair station. During one of the 2 public outreach meetings we held in August, it came to our attention that he was not in support of that. So we took that to heart and we shifted the location of the bicycle repair station to be closer to the center trail and located within the public property, and it is no longer on his land. So wherever possible, we try to make sure that we're not creating impacts to the abutters that they're not comfortable with. Obviously, we can't always do that, but in this area, we were able to make several accommodations. Through here, there were a few other changes that were made. We met with property owners. We're looking at the parking at this parcel at the direction of the abutter. We've come up with plans to show him for restriping. At this location, we added in this bump out where the curb extends. So we were able to redesign the wheelchair ramp, and we no longer required a permanent easement at his property in order to install the wheelchair ramp. So we do have to still remove and reset his fence, but it's going to go back in the exact same location it is now. At this parcel, there's an existing utility pole that is a service pole for them. We've worked with them to place the utility pole within the public right-of-way, so there's this weird jog easement here. The purpose of that is so that we can remove the pole that they requested we remove. So we've worked, with the owners along this portion of the corridor as well, made some accommodations. Up here at, this is the fire department. We've been working with the fire chief and the police chief to try and make sure that we accommodate their concerns. We've had meetings with them. We've also met with the property owners here at number 77 Main Street to discuss the changes that are happening at their parcel so that they're aware of what's happening. They gave us great information and feedback about, what's out there now. One thing that we also were able to change through here is we had some significant pullback on the temporary easements through here. Originally at the 75% design, we had made assumptions because at the time we didn't have all the information about the service connections. So to be conservative, we showed temporary easements going to the building facades all along this area where we're proposing underground service connections. In the interim, we've had a site walk with an electrician, and we've identified exactly where the services are. We've been able to reduce the size of the temporary easements in many cases and exactly locate where we want to show those underground services. So we're able to provide them with a smaller easement and a better idea of where it's going to be.
All right, so it looks like a lot of these changes are really to make residents and businesses happy.
Yeah, we're doing our best. Obviously, there are some cases where no matter how much we want to help, there are other constraints. But if at all possible, we do our best. Another thing that we did make a change in this area was, I think it's actually on the next page. I apologize. Let's see here. This one. There are major changes down here at Hayden Row. One of the things that we did was, because of the new statue that's going in on the corner of Hayden Row and Main Street, we worked with the utility companies to relocate a utility pole that was right on the corner. It was going to detract from the new statue and the new view. So we worked with them to place it further down Hayden Row where it wasn't going to be in the view shed. There are several other utility poles that we worked with, either minimizing the height or shifting the location. At the common, we had, particularly over on Ash Street, where the parcel here, the property owner was concerned, there are two large shade trees that they wanted to make sure were retained. So as a result, we did end up redesigning the sidewalk in this location. We did have to remove 3 on-street parking spaces, but by doing that and shifting the sidewalk, we were able to save those 2 mature trees. We incorporated comments we received from the BAA, the Boston Athletic Association. So we are putting on the Doughboy parcel, and we did get approval for this from the Historic District Commission, to run underground conduit and handholds. So on Marathon Day, people aren't stumbling over large rolls of cable as they're trying to cross the street. We've added those handholds here. And so we worked with them on the locations, and they're also going to be, as part of this project, proposing to install their own anchoring system for a future overhead system. So we've done our best to work with all of the abutters and try and address their concerns.
Okay, thank you. I want to get back to the bike lanes. For those that don't know, I know it's been mentioned before, could you briefly describe why the bike lanes that will be added downtown are part of the project?
So,
I think there's a multi-tier answer to that, I think, right?
yeah.
It's part of the state funding and the state mandate, but it also fits neatly with priorities that the town has emphasized over and over and over again about walkability and bikeability in the downtown and connecting to the trail system that exists and that we hope to exist someday.
Yeah, I think as part of that, the vision, and I wasn't part of the visioning process. I mean, this dates back probably 10 or plus years, where there was a study looking at a variety of different bike lanes by the Conway School, and I think one of the visions was to extend a recreational connection from the center trail to Hayden Row as part of the future vision for extending the Upper Charles. And so with that in mind, I think the vision was to accommodate a recreational bicycle user that would feel safer using a separated bike lane on one side of the road where they wouldn't have to cross the street, and they would be separated and buffered from vehicles traveling along the roadway, which we know Main Street carries a significant amount of traffic. In some areas they travel pretty fast. And so I think that was a lot of the vision that was going into some of this here. And most people who feel comfortable riding on the road, it's probably 1% of bicyclists that feel real comfortable riding on the road. You're probably not in that 1% anymore as a result of getting hit. But to speak on the funding options for the state, you do have to provide accommodations for all users, bicycles, pedestrians and vehicles. And so we all know that there's definitely a lot of different ways that you can address that. And to capitalize on the funding from the state, you have to show that you can meet that accommodation.
Matt, that includes ADA compliant as well, correct?
ADA compliance as well, correct. So, there are options of, we've talked about some of them today. Obviously we're at the two-way separated bike lane now. There was previous versions with one-way bicycle lanes in each direction, which tend to take up more space because instead of, the one-way lane has to be wider, then you have a buffer. And if you do the same thing on the other side, you have to provide the wider lane and the buffer again. If you consolidate, you can keep the buffer pretty much the same, and then you can even narrow the lanes because it just gives them the freedom to ride, more freely in an 8-foot lane rather than like 2 5-foot lanes, which would be 10 in one direction. The other option is to provide just bicycle lanes in the roadway now, which range between 5 and 6 feet in width. If you're next to parking, it's 6 feet, and you're just separated by a 6-inch painted line between cars driving 25, 35, or however fast they're going. And I don't think that was the vision for the options that were picked for the shared use bike path set by a variety of different boards and commissions and other studies prior to getting to this point.
So the bike lanes help with the state funding. It's one of the elements that helps secure the state funding.
You have to provide accommodations for bicyclists in order to capitalize on the state funding.
So I'd like to, as a resident, add, that's a technical reason why. I think that the community, again and again in recreational surveys, has said they want better accommodation for bicycling in town. To me, the bike lane is one of the great features of this project, the bike path. It's a bidirectional path. It's separated from the road. It drastically would improve safety over the current conditions. Today, I would say it is unsafe to ride bike on Main Street in downtown. There's shoulder not existing in some spots. There's a white line so close to the curb that you can't stay in it. This provides a more safety is the biggest reason why we should do the bike path the way we do in this project. Secondarily, it happens to be required by the state to get the co-funding.
Okay. One of the concerns about the current plan for the bike lanes, it addresses how close they are to vehicle traffic. The writer of this concern used the Milford bike path as an example, stating it is not only separated, it is totally isolated from vehicle traffic. The resident stated, in my opinion, there is no way the Milford bike path and the proposal for Hopkinton are remotely equivalent. What is your response to this?
So I would agree that a lot of the Milford bike path goes through the woods, and I run through that path all the time. It's beautiful in there, but that's not what we're talking about here. This is a residential area that's fairly dense for our little town. I have seen these two-way bike paths in action, not only in Massachusetts but in other states. I was recently in New York City, in Manhattan, and on the Lower West Side, just off the Henry Hudson Parkway, which is a road of two directions each way. At that point in Manhattan, there's lights every quarter mile or so, and there's driveways and there's curb cuts and things like that. So there's two-direction traffic going south on the Henry Hudson Parkway, and there's a two-directional bike lane probably 3 feet from it with a buffer, and that's it. And this is New York City, and this exact design that we're talking about here is in one of the most densely populated places on the planet. And this was New York City. They were smiling and happy riding their bikes back and forth as we were driving down the road. So it works in other spots. I can't imagine why it wouldn't work here. And I believe, I'm not a bike person, I'm a jogger. Anything, and I know that's not how we should design, but anything is going to be safer than what we have today.
Yeah, I think that's the key, Brian. It's comparing as what we have today, right? This whole project is a package of trade-offs between parking and driving, sidewalks and bike paths that are required. And if you start pulling any of them out, the others start falling apart too. Yeah, it would be nice if we could have a separated bike path through the woods, through Main Street, but that would be kind of like a virtual reality kind of thing, I guess. But it's not designed that way. So we're doing the best we can with the space we have, which is a drastic improvement from what we have today.
Okay, thank you. What is the Where is the project in the design process? Is the project design locked down at this point, or can further changes be made?
So I think I touched a little bit on that through our conversation tonight so far. Right now, we're in between the 75 and 100% design stage with the state. And again, this is where we troubleshoot, we meet with property owners, we meet with boards and commissions, we finish our permitting process, whether it's environmental or local process, and we refine the design and the concept that was accepted through the up to the design public hearing. I mean, certainly there have been some changes at the intersection since then, and those are things that, with adding an additional turn lane on Cedar Street, we added a right turn lane there, took away a westbound left turn lane to add more parking to the Main Street corridor. That was a change that we ended up presenting to Mass DOT and talked with them. But the concept of the bike lanes and where the sidewalks were and how many lanes and things like that remain constant. So we're at a point now where we are just refining our design. We are continue to make adjustments and tweaks here and there. And when I say adjustments, it's little things here and there. It's not overall changes of the design, or taking the two-way bike lane out and putting one-way bike lanes. Those concepts have been completed. They were presented to several boards, presented to DOT, and leading up to the public hearing, the option that was prepared was the one that was advancing. So it's not there wasn't any thought given to get to this point. There was a lot of thought to get to this point, and now we're refining our design, and we have 3 or 4 more steps before we actually finish the process and put the projects out to bid. So we can continue to make these design changes as we move forward, but the overall vision, I guess you would say, is pretty set at this point.
Okay.
Tom, if I could kind of interject here a little bit. So I mentioned early on that we have spent $900,000 to date on this project for the various iterations of the engineering work that's been done. There's some talk in the community about, well, let's just take the bike lanes out of the project, or let's take the undergrounding out of the project. It's my understanding, based on all the engineering that's been done to date, which is a combined effort pulling lots of different pieces of the puzzle together, just taking the bike lanes out of the project takes the $900,000 and puts it in the trash, because we'd have to start the whole design process all over again. Is that fair?
Yeah, and
Pretty
I would say that
accurate.
you're
More than that.
and we're also
Jeopardize you.
we're so far along in the process right now that if we went to Mass DOT and said, hey, we want to take the two-way bike lane out and put this and do that, they'll say, you're never going to do this, you're never going to finish the design in time for when the funding needs to be spent. And we have to go through the whole public process again to make sure there's consensus on moving forward with a change that significant. And at that point, they'd say, we're not confident that the $8.3 million is available for you to use, so we can't give it to you.
So the $900,000 we spent would be gone, and the $8.3 million we got coming to help us do all these things, pull all these various pieces of the puzzle together, would be gone as well. My second question is, if we have some folks concerned about the undergrounding as being a nice to have, and it's an aesthetic thing. I believe it's a safety thing as well, and I believe it's a service reliability thing. That's my business. I'm in the electrical construction world. I've been doing it for about 35 years. And whenever you're underground, you're far more reliable than when you're above ground. It's a simple fact, and we've seen that in Hopkinton a couple of times here in recent years with some of these storms. But if we were to take the undergrounding out, since we did pass that in 2018, Article 20, and we've designed around undergrounding as well, would that also take the design as we have it today that pulled everything together and put it in the trash and start that same thing you just described?
Yeah, that would be something that now we have an underground design that is well on its way, almost completed. We'd be looking to pull all that back out and look at placement of overhead poles and wires, and we'd have to coordinate with utility companies and Mass DOT and start that process all over again. So that would definitely jeopardize the process, the funding, moving forward. And the design, you'd have to
aesthetic.
start over, and then you'd be dealing with overhead wires.
Right.
And as a citizen and someone who was at town meeting last year, the sequence is correct. You're doing it this way, and you're this far along because in May 2018, at town meeting, we gave the go-ahead to do this, design this way. And at the public hearings and the DOT hearings, we gave the go-ahead to do this as a community. So I just wanted to clarify, they're not locking the community in to some design that they want. It's because we approved the funding and the design stage input.
Okay, how will the project impact drainage? That was one of the questions that was sent in.
Get better.
Well, one thing I do want to note, we are increasing the number of catch basin structures throughout. We relocated several structures. We're proposing new catch basins in several locations that will have 4-foot deep sumps, which will improve the water quality by allowing sediments to fall out. New structures, all the new structures will have hoods on them. So these are also in order to provide some increased water quality. Several of the pipes throughout the downtown area have been looked at and have been upsized, so that will improve drainage as well, because you're not going to have catch basins surcharging and things like that. So we have made several improvements to the drainage by, first off, by putting in new structures and new pipes in several locations, so you're not going to worry about them breaking. You're going to have better water quality. You're going to have increased capacity. So those are improvements that we've made throughout the corridor.
And it's probably between $1.5 and $2 million that the drainage improvements are being made for the corridor as a whole.
So overall, it'll impact it positively.
Correct.
Another question that was sent in, how will the project impact parking, specifically downtown?
Well, I guess it's good I have this board up. So on our color renderings, we placed numbers. So we numbered every single parking space that's being proposed out here. Because of
Can you just zoom back in on that for a sec so we can see, when you say we've numbered, I'm
Yeah.
not,
Each spot.
we gave each spot, like we counted every single
Got it.
spot that's proposed out
Thank
there to show, okay, right now you have this many spaces, how many are we going to propose? Now, unfortunately, on this particular graph, I don't have the existing just because there's so much going on, but I do have this chart which shows, okay, there's this many existing spaces, this many proposed. We broke it out kind of in segments. Overall, there were 110 existing parking spaces. In the final condition, we have 106 proposed. Now, some of that was because we did take out a couple of parking spaces that were on Ash Street. We did have to take out a couple of parking spaces in other areas because of the inclusion of the bicycle accommodations. We did have to remove it in certain spots here or there because of other issues such as hydrants. You can't park too close to them, or crosswalks. There's regulations. You have to stay 20 feet away from them. We did our best to maximize what we could get out there by using the spacing, this kind of like the tightest spacing we could, while still making them parkable. You don't want someone getting stuck out there. So we did look at also, as was previously mentioned, trying to carve in new parking in some areas because we did have to eliminate it in others. So while a parking space, a couple of parking spaces were eliminated here, we were able to carve in new parking on the opposite side of the street. And then,
so man, if you could hold for 1 second on that slide back there, because I think
Certainly.
it's important that we do point out the pain points when it comes to parking.
yes. So
In
this is
the Muffin House, a
Yes.
fairly new business to town, has 2 parking spaces outside it today, if I understand it, if I remember correctly. Those 2 parking spaces unfortunately can't be
Correct.
saved, but we did add additional parking across the street. So there's a little
Correct.
bit of a dynamic there. In addition to that, at our annual town meeting last year, outside the corridor project scope today, we authorized through 2 different articles to add additional public parking behind the Muffin House, adjacent to that property, through a new development that's being proposed in that area. And part of the agreement with the town and through town meeting last spring was that we would add, I think it was 35 or 37 spaces, literally adjacent to the Muffin House, but
in
back
this
off the
area
street,
here.
20 yards or so.
And I believe there's also a lot being proposed on Walcott Street here.
On the opposite side, on the north side of the street behind Town Hall, a separate article at town meeting, and that article allows us to, I think it's another 35 or 40 spaces that'll be added back there. We've got tight parking behind Town Hall right now with bills and their business needs. So when those 2 parking lots come on as well, that will help this mitigation, or mitigate a couple of these spots that we're losing. But we do need to point out that for Muffin House, this is going to be a tough one for a little bit. We understand that.
Can you tell us the timing of the proposed parking and the Main Street project? How does that line up, the timelines?
You know, I can't,
It would have to, yeah, but
I
just
can't
what is
sit
the
here tonight
proposed
and
timeline?
tell you where we are with those 2 different parking lots. I know that town meeting passed, I know the Attorney General sanctioned those articles, all that stuff's good. And I assume we're in the process of finalizing the agreements between the various landowners and with the developer on the south side piece. But we'd have probably a bit of information than I can give you tonight at town meeting. We'll have that ready. I really can't answer it myself. So we'll take a note to get more information on that for you.
So I did want to point out, we did carve out 4 additional parking spaces along Grove Street that were not there in current conditions. And then again, we did do our best to provide parking in locations where it doesn't currently exist to try and mitigate for the fact that we had to remove it in other spots. So there was a couple of spaces on this side of the street. While those spaces are no longer there, there will still be spaces along this side of the street, and then parking was actually extended down past Summer Street until you get just short of Mayhew. So new parking is being proposed along this side of the roadway through here in an area where it currently does not exist.
That's
So
the second pain point that I'd like to point out, is at the barber shop there just west of the intersection.
this
There are 2 spots, if I remember correctly, outside that business today. Those 2 spots unfortunately can't be saved either.
Correct,
But we
these
did
2.
put parking across the street. There is the police lot parking, which is just another 10 feet down the road around the
Right.
corner, of 6 spaces there.
Yep.
But that's one that, again, we've looked at from 28 different angles. Unfortunately, that is a pain spot. We have to own that, acknowledge that. It's one of the tough pieces of this puzzle. But I think we've done everything we can to get parking as close to it as possible. You know, one of the things about this entire corridor project that we have to remember is that we're working on a plan that's going to create a steadier flow of traffic through the community, a calmer flow of traffic through the community too. So when you park across the street, you open the door and you step out of your car, the traffic should be a little calmer going through there. It's intended to calm the traffic. And you know, you got to cross that street to get to the barber shop, but hopefully people aren't blowing through at 40 miles an hour. There's going to be lines on the roads that they can't be swerving around like some do today. And hopefully we'll have a more civilized corridor in which people do cross the street.
And a flashing beacon is proposed at the fire department. So there will be, in addition to the signalized intersection, which has pedestrian accommodations, there is a flashing beacon proposed for the pedestrians at this location. So crossing from this side of the street to this side of the street, they will have access to this signal as well as the signal at the main intersection at Route 85 and Route 135.
And Brett, that's a good point. From a traffic calming perspective, there's a pretty wide pavement out there today. One of the benefits of the project is that we are capitalizing on that. And so while we are taking some permanent easements, temporary easements, and what have you to construct the project, the majority of the improvements are going into the roadway. So in a sense, you know, if there's no parking on one side of the street today and people are driving along, they have the ability to go around and just kind of come through town pretty quickly. This is going to tighten things up, and there have been studies that have been done when corridors are tightened up and you have the striping that designates the travel lanes on the outside and on the inside and the curbing and the shoulder. That has a traffic calming effect. So those are all positive things that are coming out of this project as well.
An example we can point to, I think, and I'm in that area quite a bit with the kids that I have, and Mrs. Kramer has, I think, one more than I, is the new traffic calming measures that were put in place outside the schools, the high school, the middle school, along Grove Street there. That traffic now moves through nicely. There's not, I mean, the kids, they're not getting off, they're not queuing up anymore to go in and park, I know, for drop-off. But still, I see that every day, and the traffic moves smoothly. It's 20 miles per hour. I never see it backed up. So if we can think about that kind of concept coming to the corridor, on a broader scale, obviously, maybe that'll help some folks see what's going to happen.
Another point to that, it was a little painful for people to adjust to it at first. And so to be a little bit patient as changes are made and let the adjustments happen, because I think you're right that at first it was really difficult, and it has calmed and people have accommodated it, and it does make smoother traffic through there. Although I always want to turn left out of the high school.
I
I get stuck there every time.
So overall, you'll lose 4 parking spaces, but we have a couple parking lots coming in anyway.
I just, to be honest though, I think that that is a really big issue that while it's being addressed and so forth, I think that people have to, I like the way Brian says it, acknowledge the pain points. And those two additional parking structures, we don't know the timing on those yet. That's a process in front of us still, a planning board process in front of us still for that to happen. And it isn't necessarily a smooth transition in here. And one of the planning board members, Amy Ritterbush, is amazing, and she continuously makes the point of late that as a town we need to try and look at some temporary measures, particularly for businesses and homeowners, to ease the process while this construction is going on, and find ways to make sure we're making temporary accommodations, because we will lose parking spaces for a while, and that will be a hardship. And there might be strategies that other towns have used. Medway, you talked about Medway. Maybe Medway had some successful strategies to help businesses and homeowners in the transition time, because it's not automatically going to be more parking available right away.
And oddly enough, our next submitted
Oh.
question was the impact of downtown parking during construction, so you kind of touched on that.
So I'll take it. I maybe have a humorous example. So we just did an addition on our house, and we knew that in the end we'd have a larger kitchen. But in the meantime,
Are you still married?
in the meantime, yes,
Isn't that nice?
we had
Good.
Thanksgiving and all that. But in the meantime, during construction, we didn't have the new kitchen, and we didn't have the existing kitchen, and we didn't have our living room, and our dining room turned into a bedroom for the boys because their rooms were being redone upstairs too. So during construction, there was hardship, but now it's done, and it's great. So the same thing will happen. We set up ground rules with the contractors. They could come at 7 or 7:30 and be guaranteed a spot in our driveway. But they weren't there all night long, and they would be gone by 4 or 4:30. So you set parameters for the construction. You can do what Amy and Muriel are talking about and figure out some creative ways to mitigate some of the impacts during construction so that people aren't adversely affected. But I think it's helpful to look at it in terms of a project you do in your own house. It's going to be disruptive during the process.
And that's one thing the Chamber is very interested in, working with the local businesses to really get all their input as this project starts or ahead of time to see how we can help that process and the construction be as minimal as, the negative impacts as minimal as possible. So we look forward to, again, working with VHB, the contractor, and the town, and the local businesses to see what things can be done to make it as painless as possible.
I think one thing I think of, and I don't know who's going to volunteer for it, maybe Brian, but there ought to be a point person at Town Hall that people can go to, because there are going to be things, to Joe's example, there are going to be things that come up that no amount of planning can predict and accommodate for, and there needs to be some flexibility and some fleet of foot response to issues as they come up for people and businesses downtown. And somebody who's got some investment and somebody who takes ownership and a point of contact, so people know who they can speak to when these inevitable difficulties and temporary challenges come up.
And that is something that's put into the contract documents when they go out to bid. We have a point of contact of a person is, so we can make sure that that appropriate person is in there.
Yeah, perfect.
And the resident engineer will be coordinating with that person as well. So the resident will be able to keep them informed of the schedule, because during construction, it is a fact. There will be times when spaces that are out there now are not going to be accessible because they're going to be working in that area. So obviously, as they're working through the construction and the staging of the construction moves, the resident can keep them apprised of, okay, we're going to be working in this area for the next couple of weeks, so that you're aware parking is going to be an issue in that area. So, but that's something, like you said, the point person will be coordinating with Mass DOT, and the residents can reach out to that point person, and that can be coordinated back and forth.
And having that conduit for information very handy for people and very public will be really helpful.
The next submitted question was, how will the project impact the town common, if at all?
So I will bring up that slide. I can certainly talk to that a little bit. I think that first off, I do want to go back to what we kind of briefly discussed before. I think that there is a difference between the perception of what is the town common and what is defined as town common by the actual legal right of way. So, yeah, so let me see if I can pull that up. So, I apologize. There we go. I'm just going to close that. So, do you want me to bring up the Marathon Way one rendering?
Yeah, the 3D one.
So, this is kind of a before and after. That's centered. So on the left, you can see the existing. On the right is what we have kind of proposed with an overlay on it. Right now, the Doughboy area it does extend a little bit more in Ash Street. We're proposing to trim off the end of it a little bit and then extend it out in this direction. There will be a more formalized entrance into the Marathon Way. So there's a bump out with green space proposed here. We're straightening it out. Some of the grassed area in front of this granite curb is going to be changed into parking, into sidewalk. There will remain a 2 to 3 foot buffer of grass between the back of sidewalk and this curbing here. That curbing is not being touched. It is remaining in place. This curbing actually represents the county layout through this area. So that is the actual official right-of-way line. So between here and here, it's considered roadway, or suitable for roadway purposes as far as the right-of-way is defined. So although this green space in the public right-of-way, some of it will be changed in use from grassy area to sidewalk and parking, it is not officially a part of the property that is the common. And again, perception is a big part of this. So it's very difficult for people to imagine it as different, but there will still be about 700 square feet of green space between this curb area and the back of sidewalk. There will be another about 800 square feet of green space proposed in this bump out. And although we are trimming back the Doughboy in this area, because we are extending it overall, the size of the Doughboy Island will increase by about 1,200 square feet of green space. So things are shifting. Overall, there will be slightly less green space, about I think 50 square feet or something like that. That one, don't quote me on, but there will be significant green space left. It will just be in certain different areas.
And I would like to point out that as part of this process and where we're at now, after we get out of public hearing and we go to 75% design, and then after 75% design, we go into our kind of, we run through the process of the environmental permitting process and finish our local permitting and things like that as we get to 100%. One of the things we have to do closely is work with the state. The state takes any impacts to environmental sensitive areas, whether they're resource areas or whether they're land designated by parkland, which the common is, and also the cemetery on the other side. And the state looked at our design plans very closely to make sure we weren't impacting either one of those. If we impact any of those properties, it is an adverse impact according to the state. It becomes a much difficult process to permit from the state level. We went through a process through the Massachusetts MEPA went through the MEPA process, and that is an environmental review agency separate from Mass DOT, separate from the town, that looks at all these resource areas to make sure that we're not impacting them. And so we just recently went through that process. They had an information meeting where the public was available to attend and provide input. We did a field walk, and it was explained to them that impacts to the common and to the cemetery were not happening as part of the concept that we're showing to you today. So
I do want to mention there are a couple of small temporary easements requested on the common property and also on the cemetery property. They are mainly for reconstructing. There's a stamped cement concrete path that's stamped to look and colored to look like brick. Because of grading and building new compliant sidewalks and wheelchair ramps on this corner as well as on the corner by Hayden Row, we do have to reconstruct a small portion of that walkway. And so we're requesting a temporary easement and we're putting back the same material that's there now. So it will be going back to stamped brick patterned red cement concrete. We brought that in front of the Historic District Commission as well. So it's not considered an adverse effect because we're putting back what's there. Same thing goes for the cemetery property. We are not doing any work behind the wrought iron fence, but there are a couple of portions right in front of the wrought iron fence that are technically on the cemetery property, and we had to just grade out and put some grass directly behind the proposed sidewalk in front of the fence. So we requested a temporary easement from that to do that work, but we're only doing hand digging. We're not impacting anything on the cemetery. We're not working behind the fence. It's not considered an adverse effect because we're just putting a little bit of grass back behind the sidewalk. So I just wanted to point those two things out because technically we are doing a little bit of work on the common, but it's not adverse effects.
I just wanted to say, though, I agree with you, and it's an excellent explanation, but I think people need to understand it will look a little different to them, right? So we have this
Yes.
perception that, and we know that the common is a park, and we know that it is historical and it's in the historic district, and part of it is changing that is not technically part of the historic district, but just so people are aware and aren't surprised and think that what they heard doesn't match what they see. There is an appearance change because,
Yes.
right.
Yes, yeah, the parking is moving, the curb line is shifting. Marathon Way itself is going to change the way it looks.
Well, to your point, the stamped concrete that's in the common today, it's probably been there for 10 or more years. And so we're going to do our best to put language in the contract to make sure the contractor does his best to match the color to what's out there. They have to provide an example or sample to the town for approval before they actually do that work. So to match up, you're right, it's not going to match up perfectly, but we're going to do our best to marry up to that with the same pattern and the same lightness, color that's out there today.
Right. So I was just thinking as you were talking about no adverse impacts and so forth through that process, those are very technical processes and that's fact. But people will look at it and think in their mind that's an impact. So there's just different
Yep.
terminology and ways of thinking of it.
Yep.
What's not happening, though, is we're not turning the common into a parking lot, because I've gotten questions like that.
No,
So,
we are not.
and when I look at the pictures, and you give a great detailed response to Tom's question, which is fantastic and helpful, I think, for a lot of people. And then I would add, Tom, that what I think is happening at the common, as I look at those pictures, is it's going to look better, one. It's going to be more functional, two, because you got the sidewalk and the crosswalk, and the bump out is pushed back on the Doughboy, so it's more functional. And it's safer, because you got a one-way, Marathon Way, separated from the busy Main Street. So I think those are the three things that it does to the common.
The entranceway to Ash Street too is much better squared up and actually can accommodate two cars at the same time probably.
And if I could just make two quick points. This plan was shown through the Hopkinton Parks and Rec Board recently, and they liked what they saw here. This plan was also presented again recently to the Hopkinton Historic District Commission, and they voted to support this plan as well.
All right. And then for the last of our submitted questions, it has been said that repaving the road would cost more than funds already appropriated. Can you explain where that calculation comes from?
Yeah, Amanda, if you could pull up, there's been an estimate done by VHB engineers and their colleagues that would look at resurfacing the road only, doing some minimal drainage work in the center portion of town, and doing a kind of cleanup of the sidewalks in their current layout. That proposal is what's estimated here by VHB engineers. I can't see the number from here, Tom, maybe you can. Still can't see it. I know it's about
bottom?
$4.7 million.
Yeah.
So it's 4.68 essentially million.
So this is an estimate, and being in the construction business, estimates are just that, just like budgets are just that. So it hasn't gone out to bid because this isn't a project today. But if town meeting, for whatever reason, does not support continuing with the project and things kind of fall apart, we would go out. So the reason we had this done, though, is to answer that question. And we all know, we've been walking, most of the community understands, we've been walking down a path to do this Main Street Corridor project now for a good 10 years, if not 15 years, starting with Voices for Vision and others way back when. But for 10 years, we've been working on it. In 2010, we appropriated the first $400 grand for design work at town meeting. So we've been going down a path for 10 years. So when Mr. Westerling comes to the Board of Selectmen each year for budget time and he wants to talk about roadway improvements and road work and where we're going to spend our money to repave and resurface and remill and stuff like that, there's one stretch of road that we've kind of ignored. And we all know where that stretch of road is today because it's the worst stretch of road in Hopkinton.
I think
And
there's
that's
several stretches of road, but
and that one goes from Wood and West Main to the Ash Street and the Common. So we've intentionally ignored a strip of roadway because we were walking down a positive path towards this project. If we don't do this project for whatever reason, okay, and we've talked earlier this evening, we're on the hook as taxpayers in town for $3.4 million. If we don't do this and we just repave, clean up the sidewalks and fix some of the drainage in some of the worst spots towards the center of the intersection, but we don't straighten the intersection, we don't underground the wires, we don't change Marathon Way, we don't do the work out with the bike lanes, obviously. We don't have the bike lanes in this plan here. We spend $4.7 million. So we have to go back to town meeting and get more money to do this work than if we stay the course, keep the state funds coming in, and do the work that's proposed.
Can I add to that, Brian, that as a town meeting participant, that there's no guarantee the town meeting would approve such funding in the future. It was not easy getting town meetings to approve what we already did. So for those saying, let's just start all over, there's no guarantee we could get as far as we've gotten.
Right. That's true. There's never any guarantees at town meeting, as most of us would know, attending it a lot. The other thing I would point out, though, and it's been another discussion point in town in recent weeks, is if we follow this path, or we scrap what we're working on diligently for the last 10 years and go down this path, we have to go back and get some more money. Well, some say, well, couldn't we use the $3.2 million I pointed out early on, I think with question one that came from Tom, that came from the mitigation or the host community agreements that Mrs. Kramer and myself and many other volunteers worked on for a long time to get in place. That is a possibility, but that is not a clean, simple possibility because the host community agreement in particular for Legacy Farms, one of the clauses in the contract between the developer and the town speaks to the undergrounding as part of the process. So the funding is partly to be used for undergrounding. If we're not going to underground, there's some discussion with town council about how that's going to play out, and are we going to have to change the contract with the host community agreement with Legacy? And if we open up the contract discussion with Legacy for that, are we going to open up the contract for discussion on other matters? So it's not as simple, okay, we'll just take the $3 million and throw it over here. We may be able to do that. I can't sit here tonight and tell you that that's going to be a simple, clean process. There is language in the HCA that uses the word undergrounding. So that could create some confusion and consternation.
So really, there's no guarantee you'll have those funds available.
There's no guarantee.
If we make changes.
If we
Right.
made changes, yeah, I don't have a really good answer for you because I'm not an attorney, but it's not a simple process, that I can assure you.
Right. All right, well, before we end today's program, I want to give each of you a minute or two if you have any closing remarks. I guess we could start off with whoever wants to volunteer.
I'll start because I haven't said very much. But again, this is a kind of a pivotal project for the town of Hopkinton to kind of bring the downtown up to a level that we all have been envisioning for many years. I'd say the downtown roadways, sidewalks, wiring, street furniture and so on is really essentially an embarrassment. And as Brian pointed out, we've kind of been ignoring it, anticipating that this project is going to happen. And again, as you look at the renderings of what this will look like, it is still very exciting and inspiring to see, hey, maybe our downtown really could be greatly enhanced, become something that really is attractive, will draw businesses to it, and will be something further that we can all be proud of. So, looking forward to getting started.
All right. Anybody else would like to make a comment?
Yeah, I'll just add, we're a growing community. Growing communities require investment in their infrastructure. The two main areas are schools and roads. We're in a very favorable situation with new tax revenue from new development and debt schedule timing to do this now. And it's cheaper to do it now, where we're paying 20% of the project costs and the rest by other partners, than it would be to do on our own, or to start all over again, go down another 10-year process and end with the same relatively mix of trade-offs, but a lot more expensive. Now's the time to do it. Okay. And we have the appropriation from town meeting already.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, first of all, I appreciated and have appreciated the presentations that VHB has put on. I think that you've done a really credible job to be very clear, very accessible, very patient, and very specific with answers. I learned things tonight, and I pay pretty close attention to the process in town about the design process, and I think that that it's hard to understand as an individual citizen. Sometimes it's hard to understand where your impact points are, or how to follow complex processes, or even how to take in all that goes into a very big, complex project. So I just want to say that I appreciate learning the way that the process has been laid out more specifically. And as any resident, you know, there are pieces of this project that I like better than others, and don't like better than others, and that is part and parcel to a big, necessary project. There are going to be accommodations that each and every one of us have to make, trade-offs, and I, for one, we don't say it a lot, we've said it tonight, but the ADA benefits along this stretch, for me and my sensibilities, almost make the whole thing worth it. And I think that maybe sounds funny to somebody's ears, but it's really powerfully important to me to know that that residents are going to be able to traverse this more safely. I worked at Hopkinton Drug for 15 years and have watched some really unsafe interactions at that intersection itself with people who are on foot or using mobility devices. So I think it's really important. But I just want to encourage people to come to town meetings, certainly with their questions, certainly with their challenges, but with open minds, respectful attitudes, appreciate the process that has been put out there. And even if you have disagreements with it, understand that that's part and parcel of a very big project that is intended to speak to a greater good for the community. And it's challenging and necessary at the same time.
So from my perspective, and one that's been looking at this project and working on this project directly, indirectly for many, many years, it has stirred a lot of passions in town. And I'm guilty of that because I'm a strong defender of the project, the conceptual concept of the project, as well as the details of the project. I think we're making great progress for the community. But it stirred a lot of passions. And while passion can be good, sometimes it can get the best of us too and cause us to sort of skew a little bit of what we do and what we say and how we think. Guilty as charged myself there too. And so, you know, I just want folks to understand that a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of passion by very dedicated people, some of them sitting at the table here and hundreds before us over the years, have put into this project. There has been a great deal of listening. Sometimes what we said and what we came to for answers isn't what people wanted to hear, but there was movement, there was progress made. We did everything we could to accommodate people. I believe that this project is the last great thing we in this generation are doing for the town of Hopkinton. We've done a great job as a community building our schools. We've got some of the best schools in Massachusetts. we've got one of the best locations to live in Massachusetts. We can get anywhere, and I've been around the state a few times for various reasons, and you can get anywhere from Hopkinton, Massachusetts, in any corner in about an hour and a half. It's a great location. We've got great people living here. You take the schools, you take the new library, the police station we built many years, 10, 20, 15 years back, the fire stations downtown built 20 years ago. Everything along the corridor that we've done, all the investments private property owners have made, this ties it all together. And it solves the intersection problem that we've had for 100 years, ever since we started driving in town. So I see it as a great opportunity, even though the passions today have us a little bit divided. When this comes together and it's done, and we're on the other side of it, this corridor is going to pull all the work we've done over the last 20 years together for all of us to enjoy. And I think it'll be the crowning jewel for our generation for the new Hopkinton going forward. It respects the old wherever possible, but it allows for the new to continue as well. And the evolution of towns and societies it's going to happen. So this process is allowing us to manage that in a way that we see it as residents of Hopkinton. And I do hope people come out to special town meeting. To Mrs. Kramer's point, let's have the questions, let's have the dialogue, let's have the debate. I'll try to check my passion a little bit. Again, I think if we can all just come and have a conversation, we can learn a lot like we learned tonight, and hopefully the project will continue to prevail and we can get rolling with this, because I think it's a great investment for the town. On the tax piece, and I hate to finish with the financial, but that's kind of the job as a select person. On the tax piece, we don't have it with us tonight, but there's a debt schedule available that shows the high school is being paid off. The high school literally is getting paid off next year. I think it's September of 20, the high school's done. That's been a big nut for many, many years in Hopkinton. Once that high school comes off and you look at this debt schedule at town meeting, you're going to see the curve drop off like that. And it's not going to spike back up anytime soon. So, in fact, it's not spiking back up at all for 30 years out. We can do this project, because these numbers are already in that debt service curve. We can do the school projects that we need, and I feel strongly about the school projects that they're asking for at special town meeting as well. And that debt service still drops off in the coming years. Because the high school's coming off, we've got room in the budget for some more mortgage, if you will, for additional mortgage money to continue to develop the schools, develop this project, and really pull the town together. So I hope everybody comes out and does support it. And thank you, Tom, for putting this thing together tonight. It's been a great dialogue, I think, and we really appreciate the folks from VHB being here. They've done a great job with this project, and I want to thank everyone else for coming, too.
Well, thank you all for coming. All right, well, that is going to do it for tonight's program. I would like to thank our panelists for this evening's event and everyone who sent in questions, and also thank you to Town Manager Norman Kamalu for assisting in arranging tonight's program, and our HCAM crew who worked hard to put us on air tonight. For everyone here at HCAM, I'm Tom Nappy, and we will see you at the special town meeting Monday, December 9th, 7 p.m. at the Hopkinton Middle School Auditorium. Take care and be well, everybody.